innovation's happening everywhere and the ideas are everywhere. So bring those in, start believing in them, inspire other people to believe in them, and then execute on them like crazy, because ideas are cheap, but execution of ideas is what makes all this worth it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Zero to Exit. This is Ankur. In today's show, I'm really excited to have Chet Kapoor, Chairman and CEO of DataStax. He is a proven leader and innovator in the tech industry with more than 20 years in leadership at innovative software and cloud companies, including Apigee, Google, IBM, BEA, Next, and others. As Chairman and CEO of Apigee, he led company-wide initiative to build Apigee into a leading technology provider for digital business. Chets successfully took Apigee public before the company was acquired by Google in 2016. If you're an entrepreneur and technologist who wants to understand how a second-time CEO is helping connect developers to the power and scale of open source software and cloud database as service, you don't want to miss this episode. Hi, Chet. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Ankur. Thank you very much. I've been looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, likewise. I know it took a couple of weeks to get this whole thing scheduled. I know you're a busy man. Really appreciate you taking the time. First of all, saying congratulations to you and the DataStax teams on the recent Goldman Sachs investment.
Thank you. It is awesome to have Goldman join the DataStax journey. We obviously have been in business for a while, and I've been at DataStax for 18 months, and we had a very strong P&L, didn't actually need the money, but when we started talking to Goldman, we thought a great partnership would emerge, and it's already been very successful just in the last month.
That's pretty awesome. I am starting to see more and more investments by hedge fund PE firms and IBs in sort of the tech startup ecosystem. Is this just something I'm seeing, or are you seeing a pattern as well in the recent past?
I think there's a pattern here, and I think I actually started seeing it almost 7 years ago. I want to say 6 years ago, where maybe even eight, where I saw a lot of Wall Street investment firms and come in earlier and earlier into and doing late stage deals. And you see a lot more of that happening because what they wanted was they wanted more deal flow, and they wanted to actually go ahead and dip into the private world as well as know which ones to double down on the public world. So that is actually well proven out. And that works for really good growth companies. I think PE companies are starting to go a little earlier as well, because I think they're realizing that consolidation is something that CIOs want,
Yeah.
and especially in the B2B space. So there's a lot of that happening as well. I mean, I generally think that this comes from demand,
Yeah.
right? And the demand is there for investment banks as well as for PEs to do what they do. So I think this will continue for quite some time to come.
Yeah, this is great. I think there's just so many innovative ways, fresh and new funds are coming into the tech ecosystem, which obviously bodes well for the industry and the entrepreneurs.
There's one other thing, Ankur. It's interesting. It's not just the heavies, as I call them. It's not people with two, four, six, 800, $8 billion. It's also the what I call the micro funds, right? 25, $30 million funds where you have people who are good investors,
Yeah.
who have a good track record investors, as well as who are good operators, kind of coming together and saying, we're going to disrupt it from the bottom up,
Yeah.
not just from the top down. So I think a lot of that is starting to happen as well, which I think is great. Just getting fresh blood and rethinking how investors can help entrepreneurs is always awesome.
Yeah, it certainly is. I want to start by talking a little bit about your journey at Apigee. You took reins in 2007, took the company public, and you were also instrumental in the M&A with Google. Just starting with your journey at Apigee, in one of your talks, you talked about the three phases of a startup, and I've heard all kinds of phases, never heard of this one. Love for you to take us through these phases. You call it the laugh test, the litmus test, and the machine. Take us through Apigee's journey through these three phases.
Yeah, no, it's by the way, I use those three phases quite a bit on many different things, and there's no reason why it cannot apply to a startup and the different phases of a company. I think the laugh test is simple, right? It is, if you're in the B2B world, it is getting your first 5 customers, right? You think about your product, you think about the problem you're trying to solve, you start with a mission in mind, you think about it a lot, you actually write some code, and then you have to go off and actually get somebody to use it. that is literally the laugh test. And generally, by the way, it's friends and families, right? You're generally like paying people to use your product, not the other way around. But the point
Yeah.
is, people are using it. And that's what the laugh test is. You have to go through it. And there's a struggle, right? Because everybody's like, you're a small little company. It doesn't matter what your reputation is. You have to go through the laugh test. And that's basically what you're proving to yourself in this journey is that we were 30% off base, not 100% off base on our thesis to change the world, right?
Yeah.
That's what the laugh test is. And then the litmus test, or what I call the chemistry exam sometimes, comes across as when you go from the first five customers or the first five enterprises or the first five developers. It doesn't matter whether you have a developer focus or you have an enterprise focus. You then go to 20 of them. And now you're going beyond your inner circle. You have to start talking to people you don't know. And it is not just the founder, but there are other people as well talking about the value proposition. And the
Yeah.
product needs to start speaking for itself. And you go and get some traction. Now you're like, okay, I think we have a good product in the laugh test. In the chemistry exam, you're like, I think we may have a business, right? That's the takeaway from the second one. And then as you emerge out of the litmus test, you say, now we not need to create the machinery. This is when you say, I'm going to start thinking about creating a scalable business. I actually think more companies die there than anywhere else because they get too
Mm.
far ahead of scaling. And
Mm.
my take is you should always be at 70 to 80% of where you should be. Whenever you think you need 100 people, do it with 60, 70, 80 people, right? Because you want to make sure that you're stretching yourself all the way through when you do that. And that machinery is about creating the next 100 customers, the next 100 developers, the next 500 developers, the next 10,000 developers. And then, by the way, you go in and scale the machinery in different ways. But I think every startup goes through those three phases. And for some, the laugh test takes 4 years. Remember, at Apigee, it took 4 years for us to get through the laugh test because we had this financial event that happened in 2007 in 2008, right? And so we had the opportunity to raise money between Bear Stearns Bear Stearns going down and Lehman Brothers going down. So that doesn't happen very often, right? For some, the laugh test is 3 months, and that's okay. You just have to be on your journey.
Yeah, really well said. And not to mention that back in the days, I mean, APIs were so hard to build and sell and to explain. On your course to pass, I suppose, the laugh test, how were you able to articulate the value prop of this thing called APIs, which were not even a thing back in the days?
So let me start by saying I'm a distributed computing person, right? I've been
Yeah.
in around object-oriented programming, distributed computing for a long time, and specifically around middleware, right, in the late 90s. And so I was a firm believer in SOA, services-oriented architectures. I absolutely understood it. I absolutely believed in it. The problem was service-oriented architectures did not have a business reason to exist, right? It
Yeah.
was a technology construct, and there was nothing driving SOA to make it happen, other than some of the large vendors saying it's a good thing to do. So our biggest thing that we had to do was we wanted to talk about a business construct.
Hmm.
And the business construct happened. It started actually, believe it or not, with the introduction of the iPhone. And so people went off and actually said, hey, we actually are going to do mobile apps, but the mobile apps were really simple to use. They were all actually in on this device, right?
Yeah.
And they were not accessing backends. The moment they started, we went to iPhone meetups, and the moment they started wanting to access the backend, those backends need to be exposed.
Yeah.
And the way they wanted to be exposed was through APIs. And the biggest insight we had was that don't worry about exposing functionality, think about consuming functionality.
Hmm.
So APIs was a construct to get that going. So that's where it started. And then obviously we went to the B2B world. And then we said developers are cool. Google Maps and Twitter were taking off. And so we went to the business to developer world. But the interesting thing was the big arc around all of this. We started with the concept of API products. But the big arc was what is the bigger thing the CIO is thinking about, the CEO is thinking about? And they were all thinking about digital transformations.
Yeah.
They were thinking about how to change their business. whether it was working with developers and innovating, whether it was changing their B2B relationships, or whether it was talking to their consumers through mobile devices, right?
Got
And
it.
we actually hooked on to that bigger wave and made sure we talked about their business needs rather than the technology platform we were providing.
Got it. Was there a point during the journey where either you and the founding team felt like, oh shit, like this is not resonating, we may have to go back on the drawing board, pivot? Or was there a pivot point where you felt like that's it, we've passed this litmus test, 50 customers loving the product, NRR through the roof? In either direction, love to get your take on sort of what were the inflection points?
When I took over Sanoa Systems, it was called Sanoa Systems. It was not called Apigee. We had a good idea that focusing on SOA was actually, from a technical point of view, was a really good idea. It was great. We were bringing networking and middleware together. The architecture was really good, but we knew that the value prop was not crisp and clear, and it was going to be really hard for us to create a scalable business. So we hunted and thought a lot. We landed upon APIs. Like I said, the iPhone launched helped, and then we started having discussions with folks. So our pivot happened in 2008, 2009. But once we started thinking about APIs and services from a consumption point of view,
Yeah.
then there was no holding back. We started a project called Apigee. We renamed the company to be Apigee. We went off and started having discussions with enterprises. Developers really liked our product. And then then it was just tweaking. We were going to the cloud. I mean, MTV said, we love what you're doing, but we want to run AWS. And that was 2009. So it was one big pivot. And by the way, you're always changing and moving things, right? 10, 15 degrees every 2 quarters or every quarter. But there was no massive pivot other than we wanted to be an API company.
Love it. One of your key takeaways, and you've talked about this often about startup success, is that you said it's all about people, culture, and execution. Give us some key insights on how do you identify and retain top talent? Because it's again, it's a people business, right? People will build the right product for the right market.
I have always held three words that are very close to me, and they are believe, inspire, and execute. And you start from you at a personal level have to believe. You have to believe something to the core, which is why I always start with be clear on what problem you're trying to solve and make sure it's not yours. Don't make it about you. Make it about the person who's using your product or the person who's buying your product. I always say I love building product businesses or delivering products that developers love and change the trajectory of the enterprises they work for.
Yeah.
Right? So have a really clear idea on what you believe in. And it's got to be really core. Then you have to inspire people. You have to inspire people to believe in what you believe in, but then they have to take it to the next level because there's an execution game that has to. You have to write the right code, you have to test the code, you have to deliver the code, somebody has to implement it, somebody has to sell it, somebody has to support it. All the functions come into be. But the most important thing after believing and inspiring is that you have to execute.
Yeah.
Right? That I mean, all the people that actually bet on your product, whether they are developers or enterprises, actually have to see the outcomes that they were hoping for. A better mobile app, more Doritos, whatever it might be, right? Whatever you want to do, you go off and do, but you have to go off and execute. So the three words are believe, inspire, and execute. I think mission orientation is really important, right? Because you want people who want to be on a mission. It is more than a job to them. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean they have to work insane hours, but they have to believe in what they're trying to do. The last thing I'll tell you is I read this Harvard Business Review article a long time ago, and it ended with a very simple statement that I remember forever. Real leaders in a phase move the human heart.
Hmm.
And I think that is the essence of leadership, right? It is not just me bringing your mind along. It is me actually bringing your heart along for the journey. And so I try to do that every day because you can get stuck in the operational details of running a company, but I inspire other leaders to do that as well.
I was reading about, I don't know, have you heard of Chip Wilson, the Lululemon's co-founder? or
I,
founder rather.
I've heard of him, but I've not
Yeah.
read any of his stuff yet.
Yeah, a tremendous guy. You should listen to him, read him, whatever. But he talks about. I mean, Lululemon's apparently has got a cult-like culture, right? Very
Yeah.
mission-oriented. Every employee's got to go through this apparently 3 to 6 months of training, goal setting, measurement, and the idea would be like when you come out on the other side, like you are really mission-driven, like you said, because at the end of the day, the startups are a grind.
Yeah.
Unless you really, to the heart, in your heart of heart, believe in what you're doing, the companies you are in, companies not going to be successful. So, really well said. I just think that the startups are in such a go 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 mode. We don't spend enough time in training our people to really, have that orientation.
By the way, I would take exception to the word cult. By the way, just
Oh, that
because I
was
think I
that
call
was
it.
Lululemon. Yeah,
I actually think but in general, by the way, even for them, I think I call it more generically style of play.
yeah,
Right? We live in the Bay Area. The Warriors have a very different style of play than the Lakers do.
yeah,
Right? It's a very distinct style of play.
yeah,
Right? And I firmly believe that you should always inspire people to have something that, if I can take a basketball analogy, it is
yeah,
called the no look pass.
yeah,
Right? And if you dissect the no look pass, it's just three components. It is world class players. You cannot teach somebody to shoot a three pointer, right? This is a world class team, so you better people should know how to play basketball, or people should know how to do their function in a startup. They must practice together, right? Really, and they practice a lot together. But the most important thing is winning is not about individual stats; it's about the team winning,
yeah,
right? So if you can, so we talk a lot about no look pass at Apigee, at DataStax, and my take is it's all about our style of play. And the faster you adopt to your style of play, the more successful you will be, and the more importantly, the more successful the company and the mission will be.
yeah, yeah. Well said. Yeah, like the basketball analogy, we are indeed different teams. Lakers and Warriors are. They flop, we don't. They win, we don't.
Yeah.
But I guess they are in playoff, we are not. So there
Yeah.
is a big difference.
Well, there's going to be wins and losses, right? And that
Yeah,
that doesn't mean you necessarily you tweak your style of play.
yeah.
You're not going to consistently do something. You take any championship team. I mean, you can only do it that much, and then you have to keep reinventing yourself, right?
Absolutely. So, couple more question on sort of the same thread, and then
Sure.
obviously we want to talk about data because that's what you're all about now. So, obviously one of the key themes of the podcast is zero to exit, and you took the company in 2015. Then obviously Google acquired Apigee. In that way, you had two exits, in my opinion. This is something I'm always asking founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs. When do you decide when to exit? Is there, downside is there's a fear of FOMO. You could have been 30, 50, $100 billion company like Twilio. But then you want to do right by the teams, etc. How do you strike a balance? And knowing what you know now, would you have done it? Yeah.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have. I would have done it. And so the first thing is let's talk about an IPO. I don't think an IPO is an exit. It's a
Yeah.
financing event, and
Yeah.
it's a very massive financing event.
Yeah.
By the way, good liquidity for early investors as well as for early employees who put a lot of sweat and blood and tears into it. But it's a massive marketing event and an investment, right? That's what it is. When somebody buys a company, I think the simple question you have to ask yourself, at least I did a lot, was does this accelerate the mission or does it slow down the mission? Right? Because I think it is less about I want to run an independent company that is listed on the stock exchange that grows to be a $50 billion company. I'm not, at least for me, I'm not convinced that's how I measure my day. Right? My take is I'm on a mission. Does this accelerate my mission or does it slow down my mission? And there was zero doubt in our mind
Yeah.
at that point in 2016 that this whatever we did would accelerate our mission. There were many things that went into it, and I had conviction by the summer of 2016 when we had a couple of offers coming in that was the best thing for Apigee as a company in the market that we were in. So my my feedback or my advice to any entrepreneur thinking about this is think about whether it helps the mission or does it slow down the mission. Because if it helps the mission, you should do it. You
Yeah.
will feel better about it, and that's how you figure out timing. But there are times when you don't want to do it because you're too small, and large companies have a tendency to crush small companies, right?
Yeah.
But if you have enough velocity, a large company can actually help you become much bigger.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You spend quite a bit of time at Google, obviously evangelizing, managing the product, the platform. What has now become, what the product name is at Google? I think Google API platform. Do I have
Yeah.
that right, Chet?
Yeah.
Um, Google is mega scale. Give me your top three learnings on scaling software people products, having seen Google in action.
I loved my time at Google. I just loved it. And I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to meet a ton of really, really smart people that continue to change the world, right? Sundar, Prabhakar, I mean, it was a phenomenal experience, right? Two things, right? Intergalactic impact.
Yeah,
And second thing is, it's a geeky place, right? I mean, you're solving really hard technical problems, right? And so it's a great place to be. Lots of learnings from Google, but the first thing was extremely data driven, really, really important. Data beats opinions. So always you have to measure it constantly, right? Not the way everybody else measured it, but the way you measure it for your own business. It's really important. And use data because it takes personalities out to actually go off and drive decisions. Because
yeah,
by the way, it doesn't mean that you don't have to use your instincts to do it, but let's get a baseline of data that everybody uses. And Google's not the only company that does that. I think Facebook does a lot of it.
yeah,
Netflix does a lot of it. By the way, Amazon is very, very good at it. But I saw it firsthand at Google, and it was very, very impressive. The second thing was um, give people space to fail and iterate. And by the way, there's a time component that Google can afford that a lot of other companies can't,
hmm,
right?
yeah,
Because it is highly successful. But don't only say here's a project and you have 3 months. Here's a project, go and try it. Put a milestone of 3 months, but it could become 6 months, it could become 9 months, right? But if the project is important enough, let people fail and iterate as they go forward. I think Google does a great job of that. There are many, many things that Google has not been successful at, but there are many things that Google has been successful at,
yeah,
right? And I think they give the space to people. And the last thing was, I think a lot of things have changed in our work environment over the last 3 years. And I mean small companies, big companies, right? And one of the big things is you want to make sure that people don't forget that when they come to work for a company, they are not coming to work for a country. They are citizens of a country, but they come to work. It's an at-will employment for a company, and the company is focused on building great products. The company needs to be ethical. It needs to be trustworthy. It needs to do all the things that we are learning about our culture. But at the end of the day, the company is for-profit organization, it has shareholders, it needs to serve the shareholders, its employees, and its users. And Google is, by the way, I think Google navigates through some of that, sometimes well, sometimes not so well, but they're on the bleeding edge of that, right? And they are literally on the bleeding edge of that. So one of the learnings was, how do you do this? And the answer is thoughtfully and
hmm,
be prepared to fail. Because
yeah,
there is no prescription on how to go and do DNI or how do you solve how much a company should be involved in a political issue or not,
yeah.
right? There is no prescription. You just have to figure this out as you go along. But it was great to see that at Google at that massive scale.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, speaking of scale, and this is kind of perfect segue into the next segment where I want to talk about big data. So, obviously, data is at the heart of the enterprise and applications today. It's the new oil, or rather, the new battery tech, depending on where you are from. What are some of the biggest data challenges in the industry today?
I think there are two things we talk about, right? One is the TCO debt spiral, right? If you think about it, 80% or more of budget in an enterprise actually goes into maintaining products. And while that's happening, data is like growing like crazy, right? Everybody wants to use it in one way or form. So there's this TCO keeps the total cost of ownership continues to increase as time goes on. So that I just that's something that all CIOs face a lot. And then on top of that, because of it, because data is growing and you're spending, on what we call the run the business projects,
Yep.
you have this innovation stalemate. Enterprises are going to the cloud, but they have very limited cloud native architectures. And so without these modern technologies, it is difficult for them to innovate. And so what lands up happening is they get stuck between the debt spiral and the innovation stalemate, and they're inching ahead. And so our my discussions with CIOs and even with developers is to actually be more bold on how quickly they can modernize and go to a different point of view, even if it is on premise, but have a different point of view on how they solve the debt spiral and the innovation stalemate.
Yeah, very well said. Data is obviously at the heart of a lot of the application, and because of the digital transformation, you're seeing an explosion of number of databases and data stores. I believe DataStax taken is based on the Apache Cassandra open source technology. Give a quick primer on sort of the different types of data store, big data stores. Where does sort of Apache Cassandra fall into that, like NoSQL type application versus classic RDBMS, data lakes like Snowflake? Kind of distill it down for our listeners. How do you break down the data stores that we see in the industry today?
It's great. It's a great question. And by the way, there's a lot. The good news is we're not the only ones who see the debt spiral or the stalemate, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there are plenty of others that see it. I think about the world in just two parts on the data side, right? There's what I call the deep lane and the fast lane. The deep lane is all about serving the analyst, data scientist. It's a human, and so this is where Databricks, Snowflake, Teradata, Cloudera, they all fit, right? This is the old, what you would call OLAP space,
Yep.
and but it's all about serving the data scientists, doing ML models and things like that, and that's growing really fast, and primarily because there's a lot of innovation happening by companies like Databricks, and not Databricks is not the only company, and nor is Snowflake the only company, the most visible, but they are doing some great things on what we call the deep lane, and that is going really fast. That's doing really well. The second lane is what we call the fast lane, which
Yeah.
is where we live, and traditionally it may have been called the OLTP world, the
Yep.
transactional world. That serves not a human being; it serves an app, what we call the modern data app,
Yeah.
and that's what it is. So it's all the different components to actually serve an app. It doesn't matter whether it's a web app, it's a mobile app, it's an IoT app, it doesn't matter. And so we live in what we call the fast lane. And our take is to serve the fast lane, you must have something called the open data stack.
Hmm.
And the open data stack has to have a few things that you need to just think through, right? One is it needs to be Kubernetes based. We talked about being cloud native being really important. Secondly, it has to be developer ready, right? Kubernetes based developer ready is because developers at the end of the day just want APIs. That's what matters to them. And the last part, it has to be cloud delivered. You have to find a way to simplify operations and reduce TCO. So we actually bring these three components in what we call the open data stack to the fast lane. Now, there are many other things that go beyond that, right? Cassandra, if you're doing something that needs availability and scale, and I don't know why an enterprise would do something that does not require availability and scale,
Yeah.
Cassandra is the best database in town.
Yeah.
I mean, any application of scale is uses Cassandra, right? Netflix, Starbucks, Verizon, Apple, right? It is a 75% of the Fortune 500 land up using Cassandra. But it's not just Cassandra, right? If you think about all the innovation that's happened on the deep lane, it's also how do you make sure that Cassandra actually becomes serverless? Because you separate compute and storage, you decrease TCO by 76% because you're not provisioning to scale. So we've taken Cassandra and actually innovated on it. And our Cassandra as a service is called Astra, and we call it Astra Serverless
Hmm.
because it actually reduces TCO by 76%. So we're definitely trying to deliver on the two things we talked about earlier, which is reduce your TCO and increase your developer productivity.
Yeah, very well said. Open source ecosystem, I mean, since back in the days when I was a developer till now, like continues to gain a lot of momentum. We see a lot of enterprise software, a lot of success story, not a lot of big hits either. We know what the success and the good looks like, but if you're building a product or a company based on open source software, what are some of the challenges that one needs to be mindful of?
OSS is not a business. Open source is about solving problems that people have. A group of people come together and they say, we have like problems, we are like-minded. So, and we may not be like-minded, but we have similar problems. So let's go off and solve them in a community. And why do you do it in a community? Because you can learn from each other, you get better technology that everybody can use, and you can keep contributing to it in a very open way, because there's a journey, right? There may be four people that start, there are four committers, and you may actually end up with 30 committers,
Yeah.
right, over a period of time. So open source actually helps with innovation, and it helps with high quality software. A lot of companies have to realize that. By the way, it can also become a really big lead generation source. If a project is very big, you can actually go back to those people who are using the project and say, "You're doing this. Can we give you something else? Can we sell you support? Can we sell you XYZ or ABC on top of it?" So it is really important for companies to understand that open source is it can be the you can have an open source core, and we certainly have it at DataStax in a massive way, but we are building a business around it
Yeah.
and giving customers what they need from an availability point of view, from a supportability point of view, and all the other things that they need to actually make themselves successful.
Yeah. You talked a lot about sort of the rising importance of Kubernetes and open API, serverless, etc. I was just curious, and I don't know if you have a perspective on this or not. Kubernetes, just actually a fairly recent phenomenon, and just something happened where in a matter of a couple of years, it zipped past every competitor, captures the entirety of the market. What happened there? Why did it become the de facto operating system for cloud management? Like,
I think we see this happen a lot. I think some people call it the tipping point, right? And you can never predict the tipping point, but it actually you can see it in when you see it in a rearview mirror and retrospective. I think there are a lot of people that know Kubernetes far better than I do, but at
yeah,
least watching it while I was inside Google, I think having Google take some of their best practices and actually say this is the way you do containerization made a massive difference, I think. And the way Google did it by going off and actually doing it very openly made all the difference as well. And then getting all the other companies on board was just as important. I think Kubernetes, it was also right time, right place. A lot of open source
yes,
or standards actually happened too soon, and then they don't have the energy to survive the next 5 years. But I think Kubernetes is hit at the right time. What is interesting is almost every enterprise I talk to says they're going to go to it, but they're slow getting to it because this actually does make them really rethink their entire stack, right? It's not just let me take workloads and put it on Kubernetes. It's how, let me take my workloads, modernize them,
yeah,
put them on Kubernetes, and maybe start on my private data center and then move them to the public cloud. So Kubernetes has definitely achieved the goal that like Google wanted, which is it facilitated the move to cloud, but probably a little slower than what we expected when I was at Google Cloud. But it's definitely done it has got mind share. Like it's a foregone conclusion, right? Kubernetes is the standard as you go forward.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we in our business also talk to a lot of customers, and there's still a fair bit of lift and shift out there. But people are just recognizing the importance of leveraging Kubernetes containers to build and ship applications faster. It's fascinating for me. I mean, I've been selling security to big, large financial
Yeah.
institutions for years. What used to take them decades, now they do it in weeks and months. And I'm are you all the same people? Like, what happened here, right? But the rate of innovation is, obviously significantly increased. Love to get your perspective. What does the future look like? I love this deep lane and fast lane. First time I've heard of that because I don't live data every day. What does the future look like? Obviously, for the industry in general, but for data stacks as well. Maybe 5 years, 10 years now, deep lanes are going to get deeper, fast lanes are going to get faster, or is there a third lane that's going to come up?
um, I think every large company will want to do both, but I don't think it's about what a company wants to do. It's what the future of data is. And I think if you take an outside in point of view, the future of data is without limits. Developers will have the freedom to run the data on any device in any cloud, and they don't have to worry about how it happens. Every enterprise will have access to global data needed to deeply understand their users. So at DataStax, for us, it's really simple, right? Our short term goals, long term goals are all the same. Deliver products that developers love and change the trajectory of enterprises. Because developers are the kingpins, right? They are the ones who are building, whether you're building an app whether you're doing something on the deep lane. At the end of the day, if you're doing something with code, I'm using the broad definition of developers, you have to make sure that it is something that developers really like using and it changes their productivity. And then because their productivity is changed, you can actually decrease the TCO and change the trajectory of enterprises. And we want to do all of that. We want to do all of that by removing the common barriers, right, of simple things like availability, scale, cost, complexity, and cloud lock in.
Yeah, very well. Last question for you. As I look at your career, right? Like you've been at the cusp of the next wave of technology trend every phase of your career. And technology has changed significantly. It's not the same as it used to be, obviously, 10 years ago. But yet you've kept up with the latest and the greatest. Give our listeners some of your learning hacks. When you moved from Apigee to or Google to DataStax, did you get yourself like a Coursera course on Kubernetes and data and etc.? Like, how do you learn?
I try to keep myself very current and I try to make sure that I'm an early adopter of technologies. So, whatever it is, I try to play with it early and often, continue to rework and rethink how I work and how I work with people, how I how I work with technology, or all of those. So continue to learn in whatever way that works for you. The second thing is, if you want to learn something new, you have to create some space for yourself to learn something new, but also make sure you talk to people who are experts because they may shorten your learning cycle in a massive way. So, your question about did I take a Coursera course? No, I talked to people who actually have done Kubernetes, who've done data, and had some great learnings from them. So, be vulnerable and say, I want to learn. But the most important thing I would tell your listeners is innovation is happening everywhere, right? You can actually walk into a Starbucks, go to a place, a good restaurant, you can go to see how airlines do it, and you can take learnings from everything that people are doing and bring it back to what you are trying to do. So don't think that the only learnings you're going to have happen up from watching other tech companies or learning from other tech companies. Innovation's happening everywhere and the ideas are everywhere. So bring those in, start believing in them, inspire other people to believe in them, and then execute on them like crazy because ideas are cheap, but execution of ideas is what makes all this worth it.
Awesome. That brings us to the final rapid fire segment, Chet. I don't think even we have talked much about it. I'm going to ask you three or four quick question, rapid fire, yes or no. You don't know what those are. All right. I'd
Sure.
love to get your take. All right. Out of all the technology trends in the industry, which one excites you the most?
AI apps.
We've had 24 shows so far. I've asked this question to a lot of my guests. This is the single biggest consistent response across the board. AI. So
But I want to be very clear. It's AI apps.
okay, got it.
So
So
very specific. It is AI enabled apps.
okay,
So I want the apps here to be smart.
okay. So I guess the next question asks itself: which is the next killer AI app that hasn't been built yet?
One that reads my mind.
Got it. All right. If you had to spend a day with any past, present leader in the industry, who would you pick?
I would not pick one. I would not pick a leader. And by the way, and I'm
Or
grateful
individual? Yeah.
and I'm humbled the fact that I actually do have access to a lot of them and I get a chance to meet with a lot of them. I would spend more time with my father.
All right. Last question: who's winning the NBA?
I it's funny. I hope the Phoenix Suns win
Oh
because
yeah,
I think they're because they're coming
underdogs.
from behind. They were not that good last year. They're really good this year. I really like the underdogs to come in and actually do some great things and win. So I really hope they win.
Chris Paul is playing with
Yes.
Suns, right? Yeah, and
Yes.
he
Yeah.
and I think he hasn't won anything. And yeah, what a
Yes.
story! I mean, he
Yeah.
deserves one. Yeah, I guess
Absolutely.
I needed a team to back up. I guess I'm going to follow Phoenix Suns.
They're doing really well in the West. So I'm glad that they are picking up steam as they go along.
Yeah, Awesome. Great. Well, that wraps up this episode of Zero to Exit. Chet, it's been a pleasure to have you on the pod. We appreciate you taking the time. Best wishes as you scale DataStax to new height. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ankur. This was fun.